practice around the core concept of family finding, which is everybody has somebody and they can be found if we try.
Okay.
And so that's a lovely social work thing to say, but how do you find people? How do you engage with people, sometimes in the most difficult moments of their lives, right? We're talking about parents who've lost sometimes custody of their children.
Welcome to Care Vision's Professional Talk, the discussion show that brings you vital insights from leading voices in social care, education, health, and youth development. I'm Humphrey Hawksley, and I speak to trailblazers, researchers, and practitioners, and for all of those interested in how we care within our society, come join us. Whether you're a practitioner, educator, family member, or curious learner, join us to think, reflect, and grow new ideas. Hello, I'm Humphrey Hawksley, and this is Care Vision's Professional Talk, welcoming Elizabeth Wendel from Pale Blue and Family Finding as my guest for the first of two conversations about the importance of family. Yes, I know that might sound obvious, but before I go on, tell us, Elizabeth, about family finding and why families are so important.
Yes, first, thank you for having me. I'm very excited to be here. I think the comment you've made about that it may seem obvious is because it is obvious in terms of our human behavior and how we came to be in the world. And yet, sometimes when we look at particular systems, in this case, children and family systems, we've moved quite far away from the things we know help build who we are, human health, biology, our cultures, customs, traditions, and family finding, which I'll share a bit more about as we go along, was really built with that remembering in mind, that we have an obligation to each other in the work, in our lives together, in our communities and neighborhoods, to remember that family and community relationships are what makes us us.
You built it, in other words, to remind us, and since you built it, it's become huge and multinational. What were we forgetting that we needed to be reminded about?
I think we have continued sometimes to forget that most of the things that we consider care, ability, personality, health, are built in the context of the relationships that we have access to, starting very, very early in our lives when we are born from our mothers and going throughout the life course until the end. The forgetting for me is really about how often I'll use a really, I think, pertinent example within child protection. We sometimes remove children from a huge context or web, if you will, of relationships in the name of physical safety. And I'm certainly not arguing that we would leave someone in a space where they're physically unsafe or emotionally unsafe for that matter. But in removing children from a particular situation where there is physical or other types of unsafety, we're also removing the context of all of the relationships that surround them, which is in itself inherently unsafe.
So can I just clarify, you remove a vulnerable young person or a child from a family that could be damaging to them at that time, and you put them in a caring community where they can build relationships. But are you saying that will never replace family?
Yes. Yes, I am. I think one of the things that I get accused of sometimes is that must mean I'm anti-adoption or anti-foster parent. I'm not. I've met so many incredible adoptive families and foster families. I'm simply suggesting that in that process, in the rare times that is the necessary move, we should be having conversations with foster parents or adoptive parents or professionals who have to make those decisions about how essential it is to preserve the original connections or original soil, sometimes we say, because otherwise you're making an assumption that, okay, if we can just find the right kind of relationship, everything will be okay. That's not actually how human biology or human relationships work. We have to be able to manage and hold the complexity better, I think.
And go into a little bit more. You said human biology. Mm-hmm. Now, we all know the sort of strands, as you said, from mother to child and that sort of thing. But it's bigger than that, isn't it?
Yes, it's much bigger than that. I think there's many ways to look at this, but how we look at it at Pale Blue is around the concept most often of stress health. So if you think about the normative changes that a human experiences throughout their life course, there are many changes in relationships and community along the way. For example, when you move from primary to secondary school, that's a normative change where you might have some schoolmates that come to your next school with you, but you will certainly change teachers, maybe even neighborhoods or communities. And so we're built to adapt and adjust to that. But when it's a disruptive change, your stress response system, which is the biology part of this, kind of is a bit of, we've been talking about the weather, right? So it's a thermostat set on high. And the thing we know the most about the stress response system is that stress is a normal, actually important and healthy part of human development, but only if it can go back down almost as quickly as it goes up. And that's called buffering. And buffering happens in the context of relationships. Your buffering experiences, particularly for children, are usually created in the context of supportive, stable, nurturing relationships, SSNRs. And it's the ability to have a stressful experience, like changing schools, and have an adult or key primary relationship, could be a parent, grandparent, auntie, cousin, teacher, neighbor, to say, hey, I know this is stressful, but it's going to be okay. And there's a constant here. Right. I'm not going anywhere. This relationship will continue to exist and we can manage the stress together.
There's sort of permanency against constant transition in a way. I'm going to step back from this because I want to explore this much more. But how did you get into this line of work? Was it something you dreamt from doing ever since you were in your mother's arms, or how does it work?
Not quite. So I was actually very set that I was going to be a marine biologist for most of my early life. And which is very funny because I was born in the middle of the United States without an ocean in sight. But nevertheless, while I had my sights set on that, I was growing up with a mother who was a social worker for the state of Iowa, and a father who was a lawyer for a time and then worked in juvenile justice. And so I, without really acknowledging it, was growing up around two incredible parents who kind of instilled in me the work, whatever it is to leave the world a little bit better than you found it. And then I went to college and I was a biology major. I made it about halfway through my first semester of college and went on a service trip to rural West Virginia, the sort of Appalachian region of the United States, and came back from that trip and said, oh, I think my mother was right and I was meant to be a social worker. And so I changed my major and finished my undergraduate and graduate that way.
What did you see in the Appalachian Mountains that changed your life direction?
So the community that I was working in for those couple of weeks was really hard hit by the opioid epidemic by then. And most of the community was just incredibly socioeconomically underdeveloped and under-resourced. And yet what we right, so they're hosting 20 something college age young people from a fairly big city, Philadelphia. And what I was really struck by was, in spite of all of those hardships, in spite of all of the inequality, in spite of all of the suffering, some of which had been kind of unleashed upon this community over the couple of decades prior, the community was really strong. Families and community members were working together with us to revive. We were building houses, and I worked on a fire station. I know nothing about construction, just for the record. And the community was strong, right? The relationships were still strong. The young people in the community were buffered in spite of all of this, and certainly not an argument that we shouldn't be working on the economics, because I think maybe that's where.
And I think in one of the paper research things you did, you talked about the individual, family, community, and then government. Mm-hmm. And you were doing family and community there, were you? Whereas the government that I guess was allowing this opioid stuff happening was letting down the family and community?
Yes. I mean, I think big systems do that a lot. I think the experience how I would have described it is I was welcomed into doing that with community, as somebody that got to be welcomed as a part of the community for a brief time, which is also buffering for someone like me, right? It's an experience to be welcomed like that. Yeah.
So getting back to my former question about the sort of biological, that family link. So then if somebody is moved out of that, the damage or impact that it has in this particular community that you've illustrated so well to us now, how does the family and the community, would the community look after somebody? Could it step in when the family let down, and how does that work?
So in the practice of family finding, which is one of the two practices that we, so Kevin Campbell authored Family Finding, and I'm happy to share about that, 25 years ago. And then Family Seeing is the other part of it. In both of those, the underlying concept is that we need a network of support as human beings. Mm-hmm. And so the finding conversation of that is, how do we build that for young people who don't have it? I think that begs another question, which is, do people not have it because it was lost, or because people were intentionally disconnected, which I think sometimes is exactly what our systems do, is intentionally disconnect people with sometimes very good intention, but not with the full understanding of human biology or wisdom. There's lots of ways to tell this story. Biology is one, indigenous wisdom is another, spirituality is a third. There's hundreds of ways.
Yeah. And then from there you went to work, I think, in Philadelphia, where you set up, you devised a family networking model. So what did you create that wasn't there already?
So I did some of my undergraduate work on loneliness in different populations, and one of them was young people in foster care. And so the very short version is Kevin Campbell, who you'll hear from later, had authored many, many years before this concept of family finding, which at the time was really a research question, not a practice model as it is now. And the question was, is it really true this kid has no one? Because that's the story that we told and sometimes continue to tell about young people. And so I was doing this kind of research and digging into the idea of loneliness. I then graduated and did some work with very little people for just the first year after school. And then I got a phone call from a very small nonprofit in Philadelphia who said, hey, we've pulled your resume and we see that you're you have some history with working around the idea of loneliness. So let us tell you about this program. It's going to be called Family Finding. We're going to have this author come in and teach the staff how to do this. Would you be interested in coming for an interview? I said, of course. And within a couple of months, Kevin was coming to teach us how to do it.
Okay.
I should be clear that the us was just 3 of us for the entire city of Philadelphia at the beginning. And that was, there was just over 10,000 kids in care in Philly County when I started.
And what did it involve?
So it involved learning how to practice around the core concept of family finding, which is everybody has somebody and they can be found if we try. Okay. And so that's a lovely social work thing to say, but how do you find people? How do you engage with people? Sometimes in the most difficult moments of their lives, right? We're talking about parents who've lost sometimes custody of their children, or parents who don't know they had a child, or grandparents who don't know they have a grandchild, or aunties who have had horrible experiences with other people in the family, and there's a lot of conflict or fear, right? Families are complex. Yes. So there's a skill to how to do that.
Is that always helpful if you're dealing with a vulnerable, frightened, insecure young individual? Is it helpful to go along these strands and find someone who might not want to be found, who might not want to have anything to do with them, who might then reject them again? What are the pitfalls and what are the bonuses?
I think the biggest pitfall is that fear that you've just named, which is our fear typically. And I say our as one of many, many social workers on the planet. My experience, so I only worked with older teenagers when I started. And my experience was the worst case scenario was already happening, which is those young people were so isolated and so disconnected and had been so disappointed, and often had stories that they had to build for themselves about what happened, because there had been no partnership around, would you like to know? And so my personal technique always was to say to young people, I don't know what we'll find. I don't know. I can't promise that we will have all the answers or find all the people that you want to be found or what they will say, but I can promise you I'll do it with you.
Did they generally want to know? Or did some of them say no?
In the Philly County model, it was youth led, which meant the first thing to do was to say to a young person, would you like to do this with me, and how? What does it need to look like for you? I think most of the time, I don't have a number, but I could get one. Young people said, yes, I would really like to see who's out there and where I come from. And when they didn't, that wasn't a no for us. It was a let's come back and revisit this in a couple of days, couple of weeks, couple of months, depending on the young person, right? Sometimes people need a minute.
And how does this concept of addressing the loneliness with this and the whole structure that we've been talking about vulnerable, fostering, abandoned, abusive families, how does what you're doing fit into helping resolve that whole overall situation?
I think exactly how you've just described it, with those words like abandoned or disconnected or otherwise lonely, is the story reference I mentioned. So one of the reasons that Kevin and I know each other so well is when he came to teach us how to do this work, which is now what he and I do together in the rest of the world. We go and teach other people 20 years later. One of the pieces of that was I was asked by him to pick a child that I was most deeply worried about. And it was a young woman from Romania, who was, when I met her, 16. And what Father Greg Boyle, I don't know if folks are familiar with Father Greg Boyle in your part of the world, but he's a brilliant leader, teacher, also happens to be a Jesuit priest, and he started Homeboy Industries in Los Angeles. So if you don't know it, look it up. It's a great framework around human healing and human health. But it's really a gang intervention program. And he's got a beautiful piece of language that I borrow for thinking about this sometimes, and particularly for this young person. And the language is lethally lonely. And I use that to describe her because when I met her at 16, she had been obviously born in Romania and then adopted, had a disrupted adoption, adopted again, another disrupted adoption, all by the age of 5, which attached to her lots of trauma and other experiences, lots of very difficult diagnoses, which kind of followed her throughout her life until 16. And when I met her, she was lethally lonely. And what I mean by that is she was so lonely that she didn't want to live. And she was actively trying to end her life. Mm-hmm. And in that, I use that story quite often because she's still in my life. She's my daughter now. So I can share a little bit about her. But in that moment, for me, the experience was, what is it that's given her this story? Mm-hmm. And the story was over and over again, no one wants me. My mother gave me away. I'm adopted. And then I get a reactive attachment disorder diagnosis, and they say, oh, I don't want this. I don't want to deal with this. Let's give her to someone else. And that becomes the story of who she is when I meet her.
What's your daughter's name?
Marella.
Marella. Yes. So have you reached out now to find Marella's family? Does she want that to happen?
Yes. So this is long ago now. She's in her early 30s. So this was one of the first pieces of practice I did with Kevin's coaching. And he had asked a room full of us, who are you worried about? And I had just heard of this young person, and I was really, really worried about her. And so I went to see her, and I think it was the first time in a long time anyone had ever asked her what she wanted. And so I share it for lots of reasons. It's a beautiful story for me personally, but because you asked, do kids want this? Are they ever afraid that people will say no or not be able to be found, or lots of other things? And the answer was yes. And it's not my decision, it's hers. And all the other kids I worked with, or that other family finders would have worked with, to decide whether they want to find out, knowing that it might be hard. But for me, it was, I presented it to her and many other young people as, what's the worst case scenario? That we are where we are right now and we don't know. Yeah. And you have to continue to fill in the story as best you can. In her case, she didn't have to do that because we did some incredible detective work. Mm-hmm. She was one of the cases where the finding skills was actually essential. And we found her mom and her dad and her 10 siblings. She's in the middle of 5 and 5, all in different orphanages across Romania. She has talked with all of them, had a relationship with her first mother, until she passed a few years ago. And most importantly, I think for her and for my learning as a social worker at the time, she got to have the real story, not the story she had to fill in over the years. And is that risky? Yes. Is it riskier still to say, hey, I think if we can just contain this, it will be fine? Yes, I think that's riskier. She was lethally lonely.
And she's in a much better place now, for want of a phrase.
Like many young people who have care experience, she now works with young people and adults as well in systems. She does a lot of work around supporting foster and kinship families.
And you and her, do you have a sort of daughter-mum relationship? I mean, I know she's in her 30s, but that relationship
it's a little bit unique because I'm only a little bit older than her. We're just 9 years apart. But yes, I think we have a very non-traditional story because
Right.
she asked as an adult, she said, I think of you as a parent. Will you be my mom? And I said, yes, I'd be honored. And when I talk about her now, sometimes I share that one of the things she taught me is at some point pretty early in the process of, it's called a moral adoption. So there's no court or judge. It's very easy. She said, I think the thing that I learned is I just get lucky enough to have many mothers. And what an honor to get to be one of them.
And do you have many adopted?
No, just her. She's the only one. Yes.
Your work has also been used. I know that it was being looked at in Britain here. That was written up here, but also in Australia, Romania, Mexico, Colombia, Ghana, Ivory Coast. Just paint a picture of what you do there and how that works.
Yeah. So we have worked all over the planet at this point, and the work is really, for me, twofold. It's about helping people remember the practice skills, also known as human skills, around kind of asking questions about loneliness and disconnection. And part of our ownership, I think, there is continuing to stay up to date on the science. Right? How does stress health work with this? How does immune health work with all of this? There's all kinds of, you'll hear a little bit more about this when Kevin shares. So I'll just tease that for everybody because it's coming. So how do we understand that as practitioners, and how does it shape the work that we came to do? I actually find when we get to teach this in the world, it reconnects people back to their reason for choosing social work. So we teach the practice itself, both family finding and family seeing. The key difference being when people hear Marella's story, for example, they think, okay, I need the detective skills to have found all those people. And in her case, yes, I needed some detective skills. But most of the time, including in her experience, but not limited to, there was also a set of skills that we would call seeing, which is really around, I've found people, now what? How do I gather people as a facilitator? How do I welcome the complexity of family networks, which are almost always complex, including my own personal family and probably yours? How do I manage sometimes generations of pain, of trauma, of intergenerational being separated or disconnected or dismembered? And the play on words intentional there, dismembered as in
the members of
but also members of community.
But in all these different communities, from the Appalachian Mountains to the Ivory Coast, the strand of family belonging is a common one, but these are different cultures, different religions, different everythings. Where do you find the common ground against the different ground?
I think the common ground is often that people know this in their soul, their heart, their biology. And as we've come into a very modern world, some of the, again, well-intentioned, but we know sometimes what happens with with good intentions. So well-intentioned systems is pulling people away from that internal communal wisdom. And every community that I've ever been to, worked in, understood is similar in at least one way, which is families know this about themselves and about each other. Families know about buffering, whether they call it that or not. Families know about loneliness and disconnection, whether they use those languages or not. And families know what to do about it and how to respond. And so then the work becomes, how do we, as professionals who get invited in for a brief time, welcome that and facilitate or support that?
There's one other thing I wanted to ask you before. We're going to bring in Danny Henderson from Care Visions in just a moment. But tell me, what is truth telling?
So we did a project many years ago now. I'd have to look at I guess it's been almost 3 years now. And it was really, it's kind of interesting because it's been happening a bit in this conversation, but the concept was, can we catalyze in communities the opportunity to tell the truth about what we know, what wisdom communities have around relationships and connections, and sometimes how that's in conflict with systems. I think the piece that came out of it for us as catalysts of the process that was most important for our learning was actually what we might need to make space for is truth telling in child welfare. And we use the word in because we wanted to welcome that communities, families, impacted parents, young people can tell their truth. And that's welcomed. But for us, more importantly, make some space for professionals to tell their truth, including about the harm that sometimes we have participated in, right? So I'll just speak for myself here as a social worker. I think sometimes we don't take the time to acknowledge the harm that we cause, whether intentional or not. I've caused harm in my career at various points. And my hope is in being able to speak truth to that and share that with others, that I do better. Hopefully every day I do better. And so the truth telling started with communities, but really became, how can we welcome professionals into sharing that space together and holding each other accountable, pushing each other so that we can have better practice.
In a way, that's how professional talk began. So the professionals could talk to each other, and they could talk to the people, the civilians, as I call them, in language that the civilians understood. So can we bring in Danny Henderson? Are you with us from Care Visions? Because you've been listening to Elizabeth. Does Care Visions do truth telling, Danny?
That's a bit of a question, Humphrey.
No need to answer it. What did you think about what Elizabeth was saying there?
Well, lots of themes that are very relevant to the here and now for us as an organisation and within Scotland. And we were seeing a kind of movement of young people from institutional care and even out-of-home care to kinship care. And that feels like it's kind of politically expedient, but it's also kind of morally potentially the right thing to do. And I'm just struck, you mentioned, Father Greg Boyle. I mean, I thought you were going to beat me to the punch with a quote, but a compassion that can stand in awe of what the poor have to carry rather than stand in judgment of how they carry it. And your point about kind of this idea that we're coming to the work, to leave the world in a better state than when we joined it, and implications are working with a system that is kind of, that corrupts the human experience, and has done since industrialization. Really, there's some sort of work around attachment, whereby I think it's Niels Reigard has talked about, we reached a critical point in terms of sort of the attachment process and bonding and connecting with children at the point of the Industrial Revolution, and we shouldn't sort of eulogize about the kind of the past in terms of sort of how children were treated and conceived of and thought of and treated, but fundamentally there was something lost there in terms of the connection with kin, with parents, and this sort of speaks to some of the structural and systemic issues that create an environment whereby we almost replicate industrial processes through the way in which we dispense education or we dispense care at scale. Mm-hmm. And I'm really I read around Hannah Arendt's The Banality of Evil a few years ago, and it really, really struck a chord with me in terms of sort of how we can kind of create administrative systems and bureaucracy that dehumanizes.
Yeah.
It dehumanizes us as adults, as professionals, as helpers, because it's almost like we have to keep these things at a distance to avoid
Is if I could just, the concept, Elizabeth, that you sort of painted at the beginning from the Appalachian Mountains in a way is that you have the individual, vulnerable though they might be, you have the family, abusive or welcoming that might be, then you have the community, and then you have the systems, don't you? And they can help or they can hinder. Is that how you see it, Danny?
Yes, and I think our job is to enable that rather than sort of stifle that. And I think sometimes in professional roles we get so caught up in the politics of the problem, and to some extent we're kind of anxious. So our kind of safeguarding responsibilities become hyper kind of acute rather than sort of sensitive to the needs of the people that we're safeguarding. And you know, there's something about the processes that we go through that actually sort of maybe obviate the discomfort of the potential harms that we cause by with the best intentions and in any professional role, really. So we talked previously, Elizabeth, about moral injury and the impact that has on professionals, and I think that's a really important aspect to this, not least because there has to be an acknowledgement that that harms are caused to serve a greater good sometime in the human experience, but it's how we kind of make sure that those are acknowledged. And
you mentioned that. I mean, you not only did you mention it, you flagged that up, Elizabeth, the harm that you yourself might have caused. And how do you work through that to continue doing your job with confidence?
I think the truth-telling part of that, not necessarily as a official process, although we have had that experience, which was beautiful, but just personally, does my own network push me to be able to tell that truth and hold at least those two things at the same time, which is most of us came to this work because we care and have a wisdom instilled in us about the importance of community, network, connection, and sometimes are asked, to the point often of burnout or moral injury, to behave in ways that are the opposite of that. And so to be complicit in that, I think, is harmful to us and to the people that we're trying to serve. How I hold that now, Humphrey, is I try to ask myself whenever I'm making a decision or when I was supporting staff, their decisions, is this good for this parent? Is this good for this kid? Is this good for the both of them? And I think I've used this language several times around welcoming the complexity, which I think inherently as humans, we like it neat and simple, right? We even like the binary of this parent is abusive or they're great. I think it's more complicated than that. And again, I've had this experience before of people saying, oh my gosh, you're condoning abuse or neglect or otherwise. I'm not. That's never acceptable. Children are treasured and should be treasured and treated as such by their communities and families. And if we as professionals can't welcome the complexity, then how can we ask young people to learn to do that? And I'll give an example, which is I've met with so many young people over the years who've said to me, I feel like there's something wrong with me because I love my parent who hurt me. And where does that come from? That comes from a system that's designed around a binary and social workers within it who are sometimes really wounded, morally injured, because they've been asked to practice in a way that says your parent can either be this or that, rather than getting to catalyze the welcoming of a complexity within a whole family. And whose responsibility is it to hold that with young people? Their families, their networks, their communities, sometimes us as visitors within that family network or community.
Danny, does that resonate with you?
Absolutely. I'm a father, I'm a grandfather, and I'm a residential childcare worker, and I've I'm far from perfect, and because nobody is, and I think some of the sort of the cultural sort of assumptions we make, or the assumptions we make about certain cultures other than our own, or whether that's related to class, whether that's related to race or religion, can actually be quite. And actually, some of the sort of conventions that we create professionally in terms of expectations of others, another thing that could be quite morally distressing, I would imagine, is going into situations whereby you're asking people to apply higher standards to themselves than we do to ourselves as professionals. And that's ultimately dehumanizing as well. So it's kind of what's interesting here is I'm really interested in what we do for young people. The small number of young people that really do need out-of-home care, and how we kind of amplify and expedite opportunities to find and see family, or build social networks, and we've done a bit of that within our organisation. I think we probably could do more. But there's also that thing about how do we support professionals to walk towards pain, to walk towards,
And so the truth telling, we are almost out of time. So I'm just, in fact, thank goodness we've got a second conversation on this with Kevin, because we are out of time. So what I'd like you to do, Elizabeth, is just give us a thought. One thought for the professionals like yourself, the tens of thousands around the world, to walk away from this conversation.
I think the thought from me to each of you listening would be, this here. And if you are listening and not watching, I'm pointing to my heart. This because you, I hope, have experiences in your own life with your own family, whatever that looks like for you, community and network, as the most buffering, restorative thing you have access to make you who you are and help you navigate the world as best you can. And everyone deserves that. So the work then is, how do you take your knowing and share it in your practice with young people or parents or whoever you get to work with?
How do you take your knowing, your experience, and share it with whoever? I love that. For any comments, questions, challenges, please get in touch with us at professionaltalk@carevisions.co.uk, and/or contact Elizabeth directly through www.familyfinding.org. Fill in the thing and she will get straight back to you. And if you were inspired and informed by Elizabeth, such as I am, catch up with Kevin Campbell, her co-founder, in the second of these conversations that we'll be running shortly. And then linked to this in our thing, we will soon be talking to Bobby Dean, a member of the British Parliament, on his role in kinship care that's among vulnerable children and young adults. I'm tempted to ask Elizabeth and Danny about kinship care, but I'm not going to, because until then, thanks for listening, stay safe, and goodbye. To hear more episodes, discover upcoming discussions, or access free tools and resources, scroll down to the episode description for all the links. And from me, Humphrey Hawksley, and all at Care Visions, stay safe and goodbye.